the suicidal base in the Marianas. The night hung heavily over the Pacific Ocean, an expanse as vast as a cosmic abyss. Yet on the surface, the world scarcely noticed the faint shimmer of stars above the boundless sea. The oceanographic vessel Aurora del Pacifico drifted alone near the Mariana Trench, the deepest region known on Earth. Its lights illuminated a circle of water that gently swayed, the prelude to a descent into the most remote recesses of the planet's crust. An air of tension and anticipation cloaked the ship's deck, where scientists and engineers prepared to deploy an experimental submarine, determined to investigate anomalies detected in the darkest corner of the abyss. The submarine, called the Sargon, featured a hull combining titanium alloys, Victorian-era structural support, and bizarre outlines studded with tubes and rivets of a bronze alloy. It was a prototype that evoked a fantastical fusion of steampunk aesthetics and 21st-century engineering. Beneath its gleaming metal plates hummed a propulsion system based on newly patented quantum innovations, interwoven with valves and gears reminiscent of a bygone century. As it was lowered into the water via hydraulic cranes, its casing emitted a faint sapphire glow in the night, as if harboring a latent energy, braced to confront the crushing pressure of the trench. With a muffled screech and a jet of released air, it vanished into the Pacific's blackness. Sargon's captain, a man with somber features named Ramirez, simmered with a mix of scientific excitement and a foreboding sense of dread. Officially, their mission was to examine odd sonar data indicating solid structures on the trench floor. Yet unofficial details, vague accounts of an impossible outpost, spoke of a subsea base, supposedly built in the 1920s by renegade scientists somehow armed with advanced schematics beyond their time. The captain, who had piloted vessels in polar waters and plumbed oceanic depths before, had never felt such a persistent tingle of apprehension, as though the Mariana Trench concealed something far more than silt and glowing creatures. The submarine sank steadily. As it descended through ever-thickening layers of the sea, external pressure intensified. Outside the viewing panels, everything dissolved into absolute darkness, punctuated only by occasional specks of bioluminescent plankton. The engineers monitored the readings on a control panel that was bizarrely retro. Dials and brass gauges melded with holographic graphs. The Sargon's quantum engine glided smoothly, navigating between crags and gullies. After several tense minutes, it breached the 10,000-meter threshold, drifting closer to the trench's bottom. Then, suddenly, a flicker emerged on radar and camera feeds, revealing a geometric shape etched against the silt-laden gloom. When they shone the submarine's lights, a metallic structure came into view, perched against the rocky slope like a concealed undersea fortress. Pipes and frameworks merged with a giant glass dome, glowing faintly from within. It could only be described as a steampunk palace hidden beneath the remotest ocean. Ramirez ordered a cautious approach, and the sub's beams exposed partially flooded corridors, corroded hatches, and an emblem of metal plating bearing a date from 1923 in Art Deco lettering. The mere sight defied logic. How could a structure from that era have been built at these depths and withstood the crushing water pressure? And yet, there it stood. After maneuvering onto a partially collapsed platform, the submarine found a possible airlock door. Dripping with suspicion, the engineers used an old schematic discovered in off-the-record archives to interface with the archaic controls. They managed to open the hatch, risking a flood. Once inside, they discovered a dim, half-dry chamber, gloomily lit, with stale air that smelled of decades-old machinery. They set aside their diving helmets, stunned to find that pressure and oxygen were oddly stable. Perhaps a generator of unknown design still powered this entire labyrinth. Indeed, further inside, they came upon quantum generators of improbable origin, connected to steam turbines and belts. It was a union of early 20th century mechanics and futuristic circuits. A contradictory marvel, brass gear wheels spinning alongside superconducting coils emitting flashes of blue static. The submarine's crew explored corridors half submerged, overgrown by what looked like coral fused with electrical cabling. Overhead hung aged filament lamps flickering sporadically, as if controlled by a failing intelligence. Glass cases were scattered about, each filled with old papers typed in archaic fonts, describing temporal wave turbines, chronoparticle reactors, and other impossibilities for 1923. As if a cadre of mad geniuses from the future had traveled back to that decade, establishing a hidden lab reliant on the ocean's pressure for secrecy. Before long, they entered a flooded corridor where the watery gloom concealed a more horrifying sight. Drifting bodies in turn-of-the-century garments, half preserved by brine and algae, suspended like ghostly effigies. The sight made their hearts recoil. On a cracked glass plate, scrawled in Latin, references spoke of Marian vortex and anchoring of a wormhole in Earth's crust. The layers of dread multiplied. Further on, they discovered a wider chamber still filled with air, where a circular portal dominated the center, a metal arch adorned with icons depicting a black sun and an inverted moon. An odd, quicksilver-like liquid shimmered within, rippling like a vertical mirror. With each faint pulse it gave off, the pipes in the walls rattled. Immediately, they realized it had to be some ephemeral wormhole. The submarine's team stood paralyzed as the portal rippled and a deep hum roved through the station, as if something had stirred in the abyss below. Without warning, the liquid surface quivered, unleashing a gush of foaming water. Two humanoid figures in pearlescent scales and segmented attire emerged, almost amphibian and clearly engineered. The humans froze, shining flashlights in shock. For a heartbeat, confusion reigned. Then one of those beings uttered a croaking phrase. Their voice was a cross between standard speech and a watery rasp. The humans, transfixed, noticed how these aquatic figures possessed near-human silhouettes, yet sported gills and unusual limbs. They might not be simple mutants. Among the hush, one alien, regal in bearing, gestured at the wormhole and made a series of guttural sounds. The expression indicated both caution and pressing concern, like an attempt to warn them. Through their rudimentary translation device, an experimental piece of software that recognized wave patterns, some fractured phrases emerged: paralytic time travelers, solar war, oceanic fault, ancient devourer. The puzzling statement suggested these beings had arrived from another epoch or dimension, fleeing a solar war in their cosmic domain and seeking refuge on Earth via an undersea gate. The atmosphere thickened with curiosity and empathy. The Sargon's crew gleaned that these amphibious strangers had come from a distant future where Earth had collapsed under a solar war, and that some rebels had discovered wormholes in Earth's past, anchoring a suicidal base in the Marianas, using advanced quantum engineering crossbred with steampunk aesthetics. But those experiments degenerated into calamity, leaving only a handful of alien humans marooned in secrecy. Now, as energies soared, an ancestral undersea entity threatened to feed on the newly awakened wormhole, with catastrophic consequences that might fuse the mythical Atlantis, some reflection of Earth's history, and erect orbital station from the future. The Earth itself would face a paradoxical meltdown. Horror peaked when a strange roar echoed from a partially submerged hallway. The base quaked, hinting at a monstrous presence beyond. One amphibian alien let out a frightened cry, indicating the beast had roused, devouring temporal lines. If it continued, multiple realms would collide, dooming the planet. Ramirez and the scientists decided to help. The paralytic travelers explained, with frantic gestures, that the wormhole must be sealed. The station's core device needed shutting down, or the abomination would break free. The price was steep, the Paralytics would lose their route of escape. Nonetheless, preserving Earth overshadowed every lesser priority. At that moment, a figure advanced from behind them. A female alien, regal, with fins along her arms and a steady, penetrating gaze. Her posture resembled a protective chieftain or queen. The ephemeral translation device recognized sporadic syllables, gleaning her name as Kiram, or something close. She touched the captain's suit with a gentle but firm gesture, singing a half-sirenic tune. A partial translation indicated, "We must save the fault or perish." Ramirez felt the brunt of her emotional intensity, a ripple of sympathy flaring into a hidden spark, an inexplicable romantic tension across worlds. Perhaps the illusions of time had bound them in a fleeting resonance. With renewed momentum, humans and Paralytics rushed to the base's control room. The gloom of half-submerged passages, steaming with bursts of compressed gas, teemed with echoes of the monstrous presence. The station's steampunk/futuristic contraptions rattled in protest. Overhead pipes dripped in a stuttering red glow. Finally, they reached a large chamber, the nerve center of this unholy laboratory, where mechanical valves and quantum gadgets glowed in frantic synergy. Each lever squeaked with archaic metal, each circuit spat arcs of luminous plasma. It was a place of delirium, steam, electricity, and the stench of rust, all overshadowed by the cosmic threat that lurked beyond the walls. A low moan rocked the base, the sign of the beast's final awakening. The horrifying notion that it was trapped in a sealed chamber at the station's deepest sector had proven accurate. It had now broken loose, driven by the wormhole's energies. Water seeped through cracks, flooding corridors and devouring any living beings. The Sargon, moored at a flooded dock, risked being crushed under debris if the meltdown was not prevented soon. Meanwhile, the monstrous creature advanced, scuttling or slithering, letting out roars that reverberated in the watery gloom. The structural walls groaned, threatening to yield under the assault. Inside the control room, a vast, archaic space populated by analog instruments conjoined with bizarre electronics, the captain, Kiram, and a cluster of allies struggled to manipulate the station's systems. Switching the old levers while plugging in modern code lines on a half-rusted console, they sought to invert the wormhole's flow, severing its link to the Earth's crust. Sparks flew from overhead wiring. This threshold demanded calibrating quantum fields and steampunk pressure gauges simultaneously, a feat beyond rational sense. But by combining Kiram's knowledge of futuristic algorithms and the archaeologist's scanning devices, they inched toward success. Outside, in the drowned passages, the beast's shrieks signaled escalating carnage. Some Paralytic refugees, or leftover base workers, scrambled to reach safe compartments. The water churned with the tentacled abomination's presence. The pressure soared, causing random geysers of superheated brine to burst from vents. The entire station threatened to implode, a synergy of mechanical failure and savage monstrosity. Ramirez's concentration narrowed. He had to complete the override. For an instant, his gaze flicked to Kiram's anxious eyes, a flash of unresolved connection, thick with emotion. No words were needed. The possibility of a new life, or of a singular love bridging species and times, warred against the immediate need to save Earth's continuity. Finally, they triggered the auto sequence for the base's suicidal lock. The old papers had alluded to a doomsday measure, something the original architects had planned in case the wormhole spun out of control. Gears began rotating, producing a deafening mechanical roar. The floor rumbled, and a blood-red glow coursed through transparent tubes arranged along the walls. The air filled with scalding steam, thick enough to sear the lungs. The meltdown had begun. The base sought to consume itself from within, crippling the wormhole's matrix. A tremor from overhead signaled the beast was near. One of its limbs battered a metal partition, peeling it open to reveal a grotesque appendage lined with lamprey-like jaws. Kyurem's reflexes crackled, brandishing a glimmering device strapped to her arm. She hurled a surge of emerald electricity that scorched the creature's thick hide, prompting it to recoil and scream in watery wrath. Meanwhile, the meltdown's hum rose in pitch, echoing throughout the station with a nightmarish resonance. Time was up. With the meltdown unstoppable, Ramirez barked for everyone to flee toward the submarine. They sprinted through corridors half submerged in black water and strewn with twisted metal, the station's bones collapsing piece by piece. Overhead lights flickered in staccato pulses, giving glimpses of monstrous tentacles swirling behind them. Several overcame broken walkways, forging on until, finally, they glimpsed the battered docking bay. The Sargon remained afloat amid swirling debris and leaking coolant. The beast's roar thundered behind them, launching a final thrash that threatened to flood the bay entirely. Everyone clambered aboard, sealing the hatch with seconds to spare. Inside the submarine, panic and relief warred. Slamming on the engines, they realized the bay's exit was partially caved in by collapsed beams. With a hard jolt, the quantum motor whined, driving them through a wave of structural wreckage. A glancing blow from the beast outside rocked the hull, but they persevered. Steering with all his might, Ramirez angled the Sargon upward, evading a final crushing swirl. Beneath them, the base tore itself apart in an oceanic tempest, burying that monstrous entity in a maelstrom of twisted steel and the unstoppable weight of the sea. Freed from the station's unnatural vortex, the wormhole collapsed with a final flare, extinguishing the dimensional threat. Moments later, the Sargon reached the surface, bursting into starlight and cold air. On the deck of the Aurora del Pacifico, stunned crew members watched the wounded submarine emerge. They rushed to haul it aboard, anxious to hear the truth behind these events. Not one was prepared to see an amphibious woman with scaled skin stepping out behind the captain, nor to accept that their colleagues had discovered an impossible steampunk-cum-quantum base in the Mariana Trench. The official reaction was immediate. The expedition was declared classified, and their accounts were locked behind closed doors. The submarine was impounded for technical assessment, and the surviving crew found themselves subject to silent inquisition by certain national agencies. Within these constraints, one question loomed: how to handle Kyurem, the alien leader who had survived only to become a living contradiction? Government factions debated forcibly studying her in labs or letting her vanish. Ramirez, bound by the moral debt of having involved her people and touched by their blossoming bond, conspired to protect her from captivity. Over tense nights, he contrived a plan, smuggling her away from official watchers. In the dark, they slipped onto a small motorboat, fleeing to an uncharted isle. For a few stolen days, they lived outside the world's prying eyes, sharing glances of love and heartbreak, bridging only with halting translations on a device that recognized fragments of her watery speech. But illusions of lasting safety were short-lived. Rumors of her presence spread. The government extended its dragnet. The press remained silent, leaving only rumors on obscure forums about a mere creature from the trench. Ramirez doubted public exposure would serve any cause. He felt torn between loyalty to his career and the vow he'd made to this being who, despite everything, had no future in a human-dominated Earth. Their romance was as impossible as it was poignant. Thus, life took on a subdued, clandestine routine. Ramirez recalled the suicidal base as both an achievement and a curse. He and Kyurem had sealed away a cosmic hazard, a steampunk futuristic fortress at the ocean's deepest point, and a monstrous entity devouring time streams. They'd prevented an apocalypse, yet all was overshadowed by moral casualties and a forbidden love. His memory clung to the swirling corridors, the archaic futuristic contraptions, and the savage presence of a subsea demon. And at the heart of it all, the moment when he and Kiram, two hearts from alien worlds, had chosen solidarity to preserve life itself. Their final nights together, hidden from satellite sweeps, were filled with softly spoken attempts at bridging language and hearts. A fleeting tenderness overcame them, a promise that not all differences must lead to violence. Still, that intimacy could never flourish openly. Surviving overshadowed everything. In the end, the suicidal base in the Marianas sank into the oceanic hush, unreported and disbelieved, just one more enigma of the Pacific depths. Even so, at dawn on some remote beach, the echo of Kiram diving into the waves lingered in Ramirez's mind. The ocean breeze tasted of salt and sorrow, signifying that the path forward was uncertain. Perhaps, in murky corners of the sea, vestiges of their alliance endured. Or maybe the Earth's governments would keep seeking the alien woman. For Ramirez, the memory of that monstrous wormhole, of Art Deco pipes fused with quantum circuits, of the bestial roars echoing in the black pressure at the world's bottom, all became an indelible brand of awe and regret. Time advanced relentlessly. Official statements dismissed the expedition as a routine seismic survey, and no mention was made of the base. Meanwhile, conspiratorial whispers brewed of temporal experiments and underwater steampunk labs. Yet across the hush of official secrecy, the ocean itself, so vast and inscrutable, might hold fleeting hints of advanced metal remnants, or fleeting glimpses of a gliding amphibious figure in deep waters. A testament to the day Earth narrowly avoided merging with horrors from beyond. A testament, too, to how love can root itself even in the darkest depths, bridging destinies with the silent force of a tide that no barrier can fully contain. The Living Mansion of Salem. The day waned over Salem with a dull orange hue, as though the last rays of sun were drained of warmth by the centuries of brooding tension that haunted the town. Narrow streets and leaning colonial houses bore silent witness to a tumultuous past, and beyond the edges of the old cemetery, a Victorian mansion rose in a posture of stubborn arrogance against a sky of gray and bruise-colored clouds. Massive gables and turrets jutted like a fortress shaped by an architectural whim that merged high Gothic arcs with an undercurrent of malevolence. At times, under certain angles of twilight, one might fancy that the mansion itself shifted in silhouette, as if it breathed in tandem with the wind that howled from the Atlantic coast. The structure had long been known by locals as the Hawthorne House, though it wasn't the famed ancestral home of a well-known Salem writer. Rather, it was a lesser-acknowledged property, overshadowed by contradictory legends of witchcraft. Some old rumors whispered it had been raised upon cursed ground, sealed with the blood of 3 witches hanged centuries earlier. More recent hearsay alleged that no occupant lasted long, for the walls themselves throbbed with an unearthly presence. Most residents of modern Salem brushed these stories aside as contrived tourism gossip, overshadowed by the commercial swirl of historical reenactments and ghost tours. Yet none could deny that the Hawthorne House looked forever vacant, drenched in an eerie gloom, even at midday. Into this simmering tapestry stepped Noah Elwood, an outsider lured by genealogical curiosity. He was tall, with the haunted eyes of someone forging a link to a past that refused to remain distant. Raised in an unremarkable city in the Midwest, he discovered an obscure reference in his grandmother's possessions, a letter stating that a branch of his lineage sprang from a reputed Salem witch, indicted in 1692, but who had never been documented among the executed. The letter also hinted at a key, rumored to be found within the Hawthorne House. Intrigued beyond reason, he traveled east, contacting a real estate agent, He learned the property was effectively abandoned, but not for sale. Too cursed, the agent joked. Still, bribing a caretaker with a few crisp bills, Noah gained the caretaker's reluctant permission to spend some hours inside for genealogical research. If only the caretaker had understood the danger roiling beneath those floors. He arrived at dusk, parked near a collapsing iron fence, and approached the front door, whose ornamental iron knocker shaped like a snarling wolf seemed to watch him. The caretaker parted with a warning, refusing to set foot beyond the threshold. The man's face, etched with fear, muttered something about dark walls, unholy nights. Once alone, Noah stepped into a foyer that exuded stale air, laced with the reek of mold and something faintly sour, reminiscent of decaying seaweed. A broad, sweeping staircase curved up from the gloom, and the floorboards squeaked with each step, as if the house itself recognized a new presence. He flicked on a flashlight. Its beam fell on wallpaper of an earlier century, rich burgundy, adorned with swirling designs of devils, witches, and mechanical contraptions that seemed out of place for a Victorian interior. Possibly it was a turn-of-the-century redecoration by an eccentric occupant. Noah sensed an intangible pulse in the corridors, a hush of expectancy. Something about the subtle layout. Doors at improbable angles, corridors that felt longer than they should, set him on edge. Yet he pressed on, rummaging among dust-laden side tables and battered mirrors, searching for hidden compartments or antique diaries. The first wave of dread came at midnight. He'd lingered too long, enthralled by half-lost journals and old library shelves thick with arcane tomes. A hush took hold, as if the entire house stilled in anticipation. Then came a faint squelching from the walls. He froze, scanning with his flashlight, glimpsing a dark fluid seeping through the wallpaper. At first, he mistook it for water damage, but the liquid had a gelatinous consistency, faintly luminous in the gloom. It trickled downward, forming ephemeral shapes on the plaster. Shocked, Noah stepped closer. The shapes convulsed, lines merging to produce the outline of a gaunt face etched in agony, lips parted in a silent wail. Then the fluid dripped away, leaving a stench of sulfur. His heart hammered as he retreated. Another corner exuded the same substance, this time forging the faint silhouette of a robotic visage, like a mechanical skull with glowing sockets. Panicked, he recalled the caretaker's comment about dark walls. But the caretaker had said nothing of these disturbing illusions. Summoning courage, Noah advanced down the corridor, intending to exit the house, yet found the front door jammed. All attempts to yank it open failed. Something from the inside barred his escape. The windows, likewise, refused to budge. He was locked within a living labyrinth that pulsed with ancient curses. He retreated to a drawing room, scanning old oil portraits in the flicker of his flashlight. One painting depicted a lady in 19th century attire. Her eyes bored into him with disconcerting intensity, and her thin smile seemed to shift. Then, from behind, footsteps. He spun around, only to witness a fleeting glimmer. The faint figure of a woman from an earlier era, wearing a hooded cloak typical of the Puritan age, her expression tinted with desperation. She flickered like a hologram, arms outstretched in a silent plea, then vanished. An instant later, an echoing mechanical hum resonated, and in place of the Puritan phantom flickered a futuristic silhouette, a man or woman in an advanced suit, half-transparent, scanning the environment with an outstretched metal claw. Noah stifled a scream. The illusions parted, leaving him alone under the choking hush. It dawned on him that the house was bridging distinct epochs, a dark portion of 1692 Salem and some bleak 23rd century domain. The presence of ectoplasmic fluid shaping tortured faces might be a result of collisions between lines of time. The mention in the caretaker's lore about the midnight phenomenon now rung in clarity. Each midnight, hidden energies took shape, fusing the tragedies of the witch trials with a monstrous future. He realized that leaving might require unraveling a puzzle older and more complex than local superstition. He rummaged further, discovering a sealed library that contained a large grimoire, an archaic book of hours, but annotated with hand-drawn machine diagrams reminiscent of futuristic designs. The script indicated that the mansion sat on a witch's circle, merging a demon plane with mechanical harnessing from the 23rd century. Among these scribbles, he read about a portal that manifested each midnight, letting illusions or souls slip in. The text alluded to something more sinister, certain hunters of souls, presumably mechanical cyborg entities from the future who fed on psychic energy. The corners of the pages reeked of brimstone, a macabre testament to the synergy of black magic and advanced technology. Over the next hours, the house's infiltration of illusions expanded, the moan of hidden machinery behind walls, the dripping ectoplasm revealing contorted faces. Some resembled Puritan victims from the infamous 1692 trials, others displayed the cold, metallic expression of future cyborgs. Through partial translations of Latin incantations in the book, Noah gleaned references to a foundation demon, an entity anchored beneath the mansion, fueling these merges. The house was alive not just by ephemeral ghosts, but by the synergy of satanic pacts and intangible science from another century. Near dawn, physically and mentally exhausted, Noah glimpsed a faint figure behind an old parlor's velvet drapes. A woman with soft features, wearing Puritan garb, eyes brimming with sorrow. She flickered in and out, trembling as if pinned between centuries. Through pantomime, Noah gleaned that she was a witch from 1692, condemned but never executed, or so the local records claimed. Indeed, possibly his ancestor. She signaled desire for escape, pointing toward the swirling illusions that manifested each midnight. Desperation waged war with a quiet longing in her gaze, and a corner of Noah's soul stirred with dangerous empathy. For if she truly was the ancestor he'd sought, their fates might be entwined. But the unspoken risk, was she a spirit manipulated by the house's malevolence, or a cunning presence who craved a new era for dark reasons? At daybreak, the illusions subsided. The front door unlatched, letting him stumble out, dazzled by the rising sun. He retreated to a local inn, determined to unravel the Hawthorne cursed lines further. He found references to a rediviva, an undead or resurrected witch, so rumors said. Meanwhile, an antiquarian with an ear for hush-hush topics gave him a cryptic clue. The illusions intensify at midnight, but at the peak of the moon's cycle, a stronger portal rips open. If that gate is not sealed, demon planes and futuristic scourges converge. Indeed, some of the illusions pointed to robotic devourers that extracted souls to harness psychic power. Noah recognized the magnitude of the threat. If he did nothing, the entire region might be consumed by monstrous synergy. But how to close a portal that drew from demonic rites of the 17th century and from 23rd century machines? He realized he needed allies, people with knowledge from both ends, a resurrected witch who understood the old curses, and a renegade engineer from that future timeline. Yet how to reach them? The mansion was the nexus. Thus he returned that evening, prepared with a kit of sensor arrays, archaic wards gleaned from the book, and a trembling resolution. The caretaker had vanished. The house loomed as an inevitability. Past dusk, stepping inside, he found the walls more active, dripping in slow pulses that formed spectral watchers. Over the hush, the hiss of invisible gears, as if machinery from centuries ahead now seeped behind each panel. A swirl of dust, eerily luminous, coursed through corridors, guiding him to the basement. In that labyrinth of stone foundations, lit by flickering torches from no known occupant, he discovered a workshop that merged an alchemical bench with futuristic consoles. Tesla-like coils crackled next to pentagrams etched into the floor. And at the heart of that space, a metallic ring shaped by hammered iron and silver filaments, presumably the main portal. A presence behind him made him spin around. She stood, a Rediviva witch, pale, with old Puritan attire tattered at the hem, eyes shining with arcane knowledge. Though her features were beautiful, something in her gaze chilled him, an ancient pain overshadowed by an undercurrent of cunning. She laid a slender hand on an old spool of wire, and the device to her right hummed in synergy. Her name, gleaned from the book, was Mercy Blackwood, indicted in 1692 for grievous witchcraft. Yet here she was, centuries later, reanimated by some demonic contract. She locked eyes with Noah. He sensed both the lure of her power and a spiritual poison that threatened to snare him in a forbidden romance. Movement flared near the metallic ring, and out of thin air stepped an engineer dressed in a slick exosuit, futuristic plates glinting, robotic limbs humming. He glared at Mercy with hostility, lips parted in silent condemnation, then turned to Noah with a mix of suspicion and relief. The next moment, illusions erupted across the basement. Demonic silhouettes from 1692, mechanical harvesters from the 23rd century, swirling in a silent battle for ownership of the mansion's dimensional link. The trio, Noah, Mercy, and the unknown future engineer, understood they were the only ones who might seal or tear the gate further. Through halting gestures, the engineer revealed his name scrawled across a patch, Callister, 9. He manipulated a small sphere that generated a partial AI translator, bridging enough linguistic gaps to share rudimentary ideas. Callister, 9 explained that in his era, humankind's Cyborg faction discovered leftover demon portal technology from centuries prior, ironically from Salem's darkest days. They exploited it to harvest souls, energy that fueled their war machines. Some of these advanced sadists traveled back to 1692, forging pacts with local witches. The synergy of black magic and future devices gave birth to the Living Mansion, an edifice that devoured time and souls. Now it was fully active, each midnight unleashing unstoppable horrors. Mercy listened, amusement in her eyes, then glided across the etched pentagram. She indicated that she, too, wanted to close the gate, though not necessarily to save humankind, but to break free from the hold of demon lords. The base demonic foundation anchored her cursed immortality, tethering her existence to malevolent forces. If the mansion were sealed, she might find final release or, ironically, might achieve a chance to truly live in a more normal timeline. For Noah, a wave of compassion grew. Yet a whisper of caution told him Mercy might also harbor ambition that threatened everyone. Meanwhile, Callister, 9 insisted they needed to unify black magic incantations with advanced quantum lattice corrections, or else the soul harvesters of the 23rd century would overrun the present. As midnight neared, the house came alive. The floors groaned in cyclical beats, as if mechanical hearts pumped black ichor. Spectral hallways flickered to reveal 17th-century witches tortured by inquisitors, while overhead soared partial silhouettes of futuristic cyborg watchers, hungry for psychic essence. Ectoplasm oozed from the wainscoting. Noah, Mercy, and Callister, 9 arranged themselves around the ring, each preparing their role. She spread out a series of archaic runes with faint candlelight, chanting in a lost dialect as lines of chalk glowed. Callister, 9 activated a suitcase of microcircuits and calibration rods, feeding the ring specialized pulses to destabilize the gateway. Noah, in trembling determination, helped integrate the historical text from the Book of Hours with Callister 9's knowledge, forging a script that would turn the portal's energy back onto itself. At the stroke of midnight, the ring flared with savage brilliance. Shrieks emanated from the corridors, the soul harvesters emerged in half-metal forms, brandishing instruments that glinted with a thirst for psychic prey. From the walls, vengeful phantoms of the 1692 witch trials howled, battered by centuries of torment. The house itself swayed, as if it might tear free from its foundation. In the basement, arcs of black lightning wreathed the ring, and half-lucent shapes of infernal watchers or demon lords flickered along the edges, hungry for the devouring of all souls. Mercy, voice raised in a keening lament, commanded the old demonic contract that bound her, using the synergy of holy water, stolen from an ancient cask, and satanic runes, ironically reversing the curse. Callister, 9, battered by ephemeral lasers from a skulking cyborg phantom, typed frantic lines into a keypad whose language defied normal logic. Noah pressed his hand against the circle's edge, reciting words in stumbling Latin gleaned from the book. The ring's glow escalated to an almost ultraviolet burn, spewing forth illusions of witches aflame and futuristic cities in flames. Reality teetered, as if it might break. Then, a final onslaught. The soul harvesters rallied in the corridor outside, blasting holes in the walls, and the demonic presence manifested as a swirling black vortex of Taloned shadows, bent on devouring the triad. In that instant, Mercy sank to her knees, eyes alight with both despair and triumph. She flung one last incantation-laden arc at the ring, while Callister, 9, executed a hard revert code on his console. A thunderous clap shook the entire mansion. The ring shrieked, fracturing in 1,000 shards of scorching metal. The illusions across the house convulsed, their forms dissolving in arcs of luminous ash. The beastly shapes screeched, vanished, and the floors seized with convulsions. Then, with a groan that rattled every plank, the house sank into absolute stillness. Broken planks and crumbled plaster littered the basement. The ring lay in molten fragments. Mercy, panting, realized the demonic anchor was undone, thus severing her cursed half-life. Callister, 9, battered, recognized the quantum lattice corrections had sealed the timeline. The house's living horror receded, leaving an aftertaste of emptiness. Outside, crows began cawing in the night. A sense of immediate survival overcame them, but also a haunting sorrow, for the illusions were gone, along with the bridging of centuries. The ghostly watchers, witches, and cyborg nightmares had winked out of existence or returned to their rightful times. Noah glimpsed Mercy's eyes. Freed from her infernal bond, she remained physically present in the now, a living mortal uncertain of her place. The centuries that shaped her had collapsed in a swirl of ephemeral curses. She was neither fully a woman of 1692 nor truly a modern being. He recognized that any romance that glimmered was overshadowed by an abiding gloom. Callister, 9, for his part, faced the realization that no path remained for him to rejoin the 23rd century from which he had come. The gateway had closed. A silent tension hung among them, each in exile from their rightful era, bound by the shared crusade that had just concluded. Daylight found them in the mansion's remains. The walls no longer dripped ectoplasmic fluids. The illusions no longer roamed. A subdued hush replaced the menacing throbbing. The caretaker eventually forced open the door, shocked to see the interior ravaged by supernatural conflict. Government agencies soon circled, but found no evidence of advanced technology. The ring was melted, the basement collapsed, the data wiped. Mercy, half lost and trembling in a borrowed coat, stepped forward with an air of confusion, a devout hush that made her look like a pilgrim in a new land. Callister, 9, used the last dregs of his portable device to cloak his exosuit's advanced nature in normal gear. Noah, though exhausted, spoke quietly to them, forging a plan to shelter them from official intrusion. In the weeks that followed, the authorities tried to rationalize the half-ruined mansion as structurally unsound. The caretaker spread rumors about ghostly nonsense, but no public record validated the truth. The old diaries that Noah had uncovered were lost in the final meltdown. The caretaker, suspicious, quit soon after. Rumors persisted around Salem. Fleeting glimpses of a strange woman glimpsed wandering the old burying ground at twilight, or a man with an unusual glint in his eyes scanning for leftover future tech. The municipality turned the Hawthorne house into a sealed property, out of bounds to visitors, rumored to be awaiting demolition. But for Noah, the memory of that final night, the swirling illusions of Puritan witches, the nightmares of future machines feeding on souls, the synergy of black magic and advanced science, persisted in his mind. He recognized he had stepped across a threshold few ever see, the dangerous merging of time's extremes, harnessed by malicious forces. And the tenuous romance with Mercy, once a cursed witch from 1692, lingered as an uncharted territory. She wanted to see the modern world, yet the trauma of centuries weighed on her. Now free from the demon plane, she existed uncertainly in a realm that barely believed in her. Sometimes he brought her books, taught her about electricity, basic social norms. She, in turn, recounted flickers of the 17th century mania that had consumed Salem, how the demon lords exploited the witch hunts to anchor ephemeral curses, forging a stepping stone for future soul harvesters. Meanwhile, Callister, 9, remained distant, lodging with a hidden caretaker's friend, quietly tinkering with scraps of battered advanced gear in hopes of forging a life. The tension between him and Mercy was raw, each from an opposite extreme of the timeline, each half lost in a modern era indifferent to their tragedies. Over time, the illusion stopped haunting Salem's nights. The region's visitors, enthralled by more typical ghost tours, never guessed how close the town had come to truly merging with a mechanical future of cold steel cruelty. The synergy of demon plane and 23rd century technology had crumbled, yet a prickle of uncertainty remained. If other watchers from the future discovered any leftover clues, or if a trace of demon lord presence survived in battered pages or hidden artifacts, a new meltdown could occur. That worry gnawed at Noah, Mercy, and Callister, 9, forging a clandestine alliance. If threatened again, they would gather to quell the cyclical darkness. In that final hush, Noah gleaned that he, too, was changed. He had found partial truth in his genealogical quest. The rediviva, which was indeed an ancestor or near relative, twisting their emotional closeness into something taboo. The reality of their ephemeral bond overshadowed the typical boundaries of love or heritage, stirring a faint taboo that gave him nightmares. Mercy's presence was more complicated than a mere love interest. She was a living reminder of generational curses. Callister, 9, a perpetual sentinel, remained a vantage from the future's meltdown. The house, half collapsed in hush, was boarded up, but whether it was truly asleep or waiting to resurrect was an open question. Though the story was hushed in official lines, an intangible wave lingered in Salem's atmosphere. Some nights, the wind on deserted roads carried a faint mechanical hum, or passers-by glimpsed ephemeral shapes wearing old bonnets or futuristic visors. Speculation thrived on message boards about time vortexes in the Hawthorne house. Meanwhile, the caretaker's nightmares recounted puddles of black fluid dripping from intangible corners. Yet no further meltdown occurred. The synergy had been severed. Salem slipped back into its standard routine of witch-themed souvenirs and reenactments, while a deeper truth lay coiled in the mansion's battered foundation, bricked behind illusions. And so the living mansion was hushed into rumor, overshadowed by louder events. Noah carried forward, forging a fragile life with Mercy, half-acting as her guide to a century she did not belong in. She, tentative, discovered the quiet solace in forests and coastline dawns. The future man, Callister, 9, studied old textbooks, and advanced them with his knowledge, possibly shaping small wonders behind closed doors. The threat of the demon plane receded, but each felt the precariousness of a borrowed existence. The unholy synergy might reawaken if cosmic forces aligned. Yet for now, the house's silent halls stood inert, stripped of illusions, or so it seemed. Beneath the moonless nights, Salem exhaled centuries of tension. The finishing hush drifted across the overgrown garden behind the mansion. If one were to press an ear to the boards, perhaps they'd sense a faint heartbeat, the residue of the house that once sweated ectoplasmic fluids. Some might perceive the echoes of tortured witch illusions or the stealthy footfalls of cyborg hunters from a collapsed timeline. But for now, the gateway had sealed, love had emerged in brief, haunted intervals, and the labyrinth of synergy between demon lore and futuristic nightmares had yielded to the tenacious calm of dawn. A fragile piece, yes, but an unwavering testament to how time can converge in monstrous forms, and how fleeting, forbidden connections can defy ages, even within the cursed walls of Salem's living mansion.